These olfactory receptors are spread out, they're either elongate. So eels have these really elongate olfactory systems that can help them sense things from kind of further away. Shorter others, taste receptors are often found on the surface of different species of fish, either just around the head, around the jaws. Some of them have these little barbels, these little extra projections, usually around the mouth or chin, that can help them sense prey. We talked about schooling earlier a bit, and this is one way that many fish will school together, which is the lateral line system. And hopefully you'll be able to see the lateral line on the species that we're looking at today. These are, again, canals, somewhat similar, though maybe a bit less complex as the amphibian ones you need. They're basically little fluid-filled pores along the body of a fish, okay, that you can actually see in many species. You can visibly see it externally. You'll see kind of this line going along. Calvin's checking now, right? So it can detect vibrations in the water. Okay? So it's one way, without actually being able to see the fish around them, they can detect that they're around them. So they use it largely for schooling or staying close to. So when you see a school of fish, sometimes they're equidistant, and I'm always amazed that they're in these very tight groups, yet they're not just like bumping into each other all the time. They can be like very much equidistant from each other, and that's using the lateral line system. They can also use it to locate prey and potential predators because they can sense vibrations in the water using these little fluid-filled sacs or pores. So it's a very unique system to fishes. Within the head of a fish, okay, fish have what are called otoliths. Okay? What does this kind of remind you of? Yeah, tree rings. Okay. They can be used in very much the same way for humans to get information on these fish. Okay? And fishes will actually lay down rings in these little bones. Okay? So otolith literally means ear bone, okay? Or ear rock, I guess. So there are little tiny structures that are within the head region, kind of just like behind and above the brain typically. And they're set within little fluid-filled sacs, kind of like our ear bones. And they're used for equilibrium and balance, much like ours are. Okay? But in an aquatic environment, they're pretty important for keeping them basically upright and knowing their orientation. And in addition, they lay down both daily, when they're really little, and annual rings, kind of like a tree does. Okay? So you can age a fish using these, and we'll actually, in the fish that we dissect today, we're going to extract the otoliths, or at least try to. I don't think I've extracted them from all of the type of fish that we have today. But between Calvin and I should be able to help you out, hopefully. So we'll get the otoliths out and take a look at them, okay? And see, some need to be sanded, you have to kind of prep them, but a lot of them you can actually look at and get some idea of their age based on that. So they're calcareous, bony structures, okay? They can use age and have these things. Bony fish rely very much so on vision, more so than sharks do. Okay? So bony fish versus cartilaginous fish, which are the sharks. Sharks have nictitating membranes covering the eye, okay, and protecting them. So they are visual predators, but a lot of bony fish have much more developed visual systems. Can you go back for like 1 second? Thanks. Yeah.
For sharks, don't a lot of them eat like smaller fish?
Some, yeah.
So why do they have the lenticular membrane if the fish are so much smaller than them?
Well, some that, I mean, probably some of them don't need to if they're eating small fish, but a lot of them are eating big things where they're taking a chunk out of something, so they're kind of going up into a prey. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so cartilaginous fish, most of so sharks, rays, skates, all tend to be very much carnivorous. But with bony fishes, there's a wide range of feeding behaviors, from carnivorous to herbivorous to detritivores, omnivores. And within both of these groups, kind of have a range of ways of feeding. So you have carnivores that can be crushing prey. Some of them have pharyngeal teeth or jaws, so extra sort of bony plates within the jaw that they're using to crush things like mussels or clams, like hard item prey. And then some of them are ambush predators. So can anyone think of examples of these types of feeding behavior? So like crushing prey. So who's got like a big like jaw that would just be like going after, say, crabs or something that'd be kind of hard?
Shark.
Some sharks, yeah. What about, well, pharyngeal teeth you're probably not as familiar with, but things like rays, for example.
Do eels have pharyngeal teeth?
I don't know if they have pharyngeal. They've got pretty large teeth that they use for grasping. They have pharyngeal. They do for grasping. They have large teeth for grasping, though, and then for crushing. Yeah. So they have kind of a combo.
That mantis shrimp that we looked at, would that be a crushing?
What's that?
The mantis shrimp that we looked at, or the one that has like boxing?
Well, I've seen fish examples, so yeah.
Oh, like just the crushing out, like
Yeah.
one went to that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. What about an ambush predator? So that's something that would kind of be sitting there and would just jump out and grab something. Halibut? A halibut? Yeah. So they'd be sitting on the bottom and they'll just like, they have actually really large jaws. Hopefully we'll get, when we go out on the boat, we fairly commonly will get halibut, usually smaller ones, but you can see the size of their jaw, their body size, and their teeth. Pretty nasty. And then we have a whole suite of herbivorous fishes, okay? And they range from scraping, okay? So parrotfish, for example, will kind of scrape both, they'll eat both algae and sometimes even coral material. And some of them even have a gizzard-like structure like some birds do for digestion to help break down some of the hard materials. Okay. A few more slides, guys. Almost. Some of them are filter feeders, okay, which we've talked about a lot with the vertebrate groups. Okay? But in some cases, they're not just getting little teeny tiny plankton, but even sometimes a little bit bigger stuff. So whale sharks and basking sharks and some pelagic fish will actually use what are called gill breakers. Okay, so this is a structure. This is the gill structure in a typical fish. Okay. These are the gill filaments, which are the blood-filled structure that they're using for obtaining oxygen, okay, oxygen in blood. On the inside of that gill arch, okay, which is something you guys will look at today, there are different types of gill rakers. Okay? Depending on the feeding type of that particular fish, these gill rakers are going to look very different. Sometimes they're really long and fine, okay? And that's probably indicative of a fish that's eating plankton or things out of the water column. Okay? even more so than this. And they're really long and fun because they're kind of straining things out of the water, pushing that water back out through the operculum. When they're highly predatory, usually they have very short and kind of sparse gill ranges. And they're not as necessary for filtering. So that's something to look for when you're looking at your fish today. Okay. And then finally, there are a lot of species that we mentioned this before. Okay, fish tend to be ectothermic with some exceptions where they can actually warm their blood. And there are some that fishes live in basically every environment that's aquatic, and even partially terrestrial. Okay. So how do fishes that live in and around Antarctica, for example, how do they do that? In some cases, fish that live in these extreme cold environments actually have these antifreeze proteins in their blood. So it keeps their blood and any other body fluids from freezing, which is really very cool. So that it's a protein. So what that does is decrease the freezing temp of any ice crystals, and so that they don't form crystals within their blood, which would obviously be problematic, right? It basically lead to blockage in the blood, which would die. They tend to have fewer red blood cells and a lower concentration of hemoglobin. So that's another protein. They also have fairly low metabolic rates, which kind of makes sense. If you're in an extreme temperature, kind of outside the normal body temp range of most fish, for example, you're going to have a fairly low metabolic rate. So they grow slower, but they often live a really long time, but their lifespans are a little bit longer.
How does the lower number of red blood cells help?
I think it's a balance of the different types of proteins in the body, in the blood. But yeah, I don't know exactly why the different number of blood cells. That would go more towards the hemoglobin. I'm not sure why the number of blood cells is different. I'll look at that. Or I'll ask. I have a friend who actually works on Arctic fishes. I'll ask them. They probably would know better. That's a good question. Okay. We'll do this last slide and then we'll move on. This is getting a little bit late. Okay, so how do they avoid predation? We've talked about a couple different strategies already. One, obviously, is camouflage. One is to inflate their bodies by inhaling water, like our little friend over there might do if you really stress them out. So you're going to stress them out? But yeah, it would involve some extreme handling probably, which would make them very unhappy. They usually only do it when they're pretty unhappy. I brought my nephews in here a couple times actually. I have over the last year. And they're always like, make it puff up. I was like, no, it's really mean. I'm not gonna make it do that. Some fishes can actually glide through the air to avoid predation. So one of our local examples is the California flying fish, which will actually leap pretty broadly out of the water. I've actually had a friend who, you do have to be somewhat careful. I had a friend who had one leap out. He was on a whaler, driving a boat, going full speed. It leapt out and actually hit him in the chest and nearly knocked him over. If it had hit him a little further up, it would have hit his trachea and might have caused him to pass out or something. So he was kind of lucky. But that's a fairly rare occurrence, but it can happen. They will jump pretty high. And then we already saw from last week our lovely pearlfish friend that lives in the body cavity of other animals, namely the anus of the sea cucumber. So there's lots of lovely ways to avoid predation. All right, I'm going to stop here. We'll pick this up